Good morning. Hello, everybody. We are pleased to start the last event of the program of events related to the 11F and 8M this year. And today we are very excited to receive Lídia Farré because she is a social scientist that does research in the area of gender gaps and things that we discuss very often, but maybe without the expertise that is required to do things that are not just opinions. And we hope that she will enlighten us. Lídia is an economist that is specialized in gender, migration, and education economics. And she did a PhD in economics at the European University Institute in Florence in 2006. And then she moved to academic positions at University of Barcelona and University of Alicante. And since 2022, she's a tenured scientist at Institute of Economic Analysis of the CSIC here at the UAB campus. Her research is on labor and public economics, and she focuses in the evaluation of and design of policies that try to promote equity and efficiency in the labor markets. And in particular, she investigates the role of gender in economy, trying to put emphasis on the politics and address to reduce the gender gaps. For instance, the effects of reforms of the paternity leaves and things like that, how this impacts in the labor market and also in society in a broader scope. All this research is of high quality, and in fact, Lídia is recognized internationally. She's a member of the Institute of Labor Economics, which is a virtual institute, I think, of people working internationally in this area. And her research is cited among the top most cited researchers according to the IDEAS bibliographic database that is used in the field of economics. She has received prizes like the Best Paper Award in Labor Economics, and she's member of the Spanish Council of Economic Advisors, and also is lecturer and is in charge of academic programs at Barcelona School of Economics. So, Lídia, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for this nice introduction. So I'm very happy to be here because I work at the EI, which is a research center next door, but we interact a lot with the econ department, but not with other CSIC institutions, right? So it's nice to meet our neighbors. So the way I've organized this talk is I'm trying to first provide an overview of my research, so different projects I have on different issues. And then I'll focus on an issue that I think is very relevant for us, that is gender gaps in research, okay? So I'm gonna do half-half. So first of all, let me start by defining what gender economics is about. So I met Lourdes in Sevilla in one of these committees of meetings of gender equality, of gender committees, whatever it's called, of the CSIC, and we start talking about, and so I think that there was like a nice connection, and I think that that's why I'm here. So, and Lourdes told me, what's gender economics about, right? So a brief introduction. So it's a field within economics that deals with analyzing how gender differences affect and are affected by economic decisions, public policies, and social structures in general, okay? So what we do is to basically measure gender gaps in different margins in the economy and try to identify the causes of these gaps and propose solutions to eradicate, now I like to use this word, eradicate gender gaps, okay? Also important is that in 2023, we received, this field received a Nobel Prize and it was Claudia Goldin, okay, who after 50 years of awards, she was the first female economist to receive the prize alone, okay? And the third, so after 50 years, or over these 50 years, only 3 female economists have been awarded with the Nobel Prize, okay? So we were very happy because she got it for having advanced our understanding on women's labor market outcomes, okay? And most of my research, or part of my research, relies on her ideas and contribution, okay? So I think that gender gaps, or studying differences in the labor market, that's between men and women, it's interesting because gaps persist all over the place, okay? So there's no single country in the world where women are better than men in terms of labor market outcomes, okay? So I refer to the gender gap in participation, for instance. So on average in the world, the participation rate of men is around 72%, while that of women is much lower. That's the average gap, but there are parts of the world where these differences are extreme, okay? So that's in terms of participation. Also, probably these days you've heard a lot about gaps in terms of earnings or wages, okay? So here, differences in the earnings of men and women are also important. And something very concerning is the absence of women in top positions, okay? So those making decisions or taking decisions. So there is a significant absence in all spheres, right? Like the public sphere, but also the private sector, in academia, okay? So you are all familiar with the scissor graph at the CSIC, but this is not only a CSIC issue, okay? It's all over the place. So, and the lack of women that it's a top position, that it's known as the glass ceiling, has a lot of implications, as I'm gonna discuss later on, okay? So I think that for many years, we all had the feeling, or at least myself, I had the feeling that gender equality was an issue of social justice, right? So men and women have to be equal because that's justice and so on. But nowadays, I'm very convinced that promoting gender equality is also an issue of economic efficiency. This means making a good use of the resources you have, okay? And the thing is that the lack of women in certain segments of the economy or the society suggests a misallocation of resources with an important cost for society and economic growth in general. Okay, so under the assumption that innate talent is equally distributed between men and women, which is a reasonable assumption, the absence of women in STEM, the absence of women in certain or in top positions means that we are missing a lot of talent, okay? So eliminating gender gaps, it's a necessary condition to improve economic efficiency. And indeed, a recent study estimates that between the 20% and the 40% of GDP growth in the US between 1960 and 2010 can be attributed to improvements in talent allocation, okay? Can be attributed to changes in the occupational distribution of women and minorities, okay? And to give an example, the authors highlight that in the 60s, 96% of lawyers and doctors were men, and in 2010, this percentage had decreased to around 62%. Okay, so these are the type of changes that promote part of the economic growth in the US. Okay, so first idea is that gender equality is not only about social justice. I think it's important in terms of social justice, but it's also a matter of economic efficiency, okay? Of making a good use of all the talent that you have in the economy, okay? And in particular, reduce female talent misallocation, okay? So let me briefly summarize the historical changes of the situation of women in the labor market during the past century, okay? So one of the most important changes in the labor market during the last century was this dramatic increase of the participation of females, right? So you see that during the first half of the last century, participation rates of female was around 30%, and this is the US, okay? And by the end of the century or even beginning of, nowadays, it's around, as I said, the numbers I showed at the beginning, around 75, 80%, okay? While that of men has remained pretty stable, or if anything, decreased. And this is mainly due, there are many factors explaining this thing that I'm gonna list in a second. And this is mainly due to the to the welfare system, and in particular the introduction of pensions that allow men and women to retire early. Okay, so that's why we observe the decrease. So what or how can we understand, or which are the reasons between this drastic increase in female labor force participation? Okay, so the most or the factors that we have identified as more relevant are the expansion of the service sectors, or the change in the structure of the economy, offering positions that maybe are more attractive to women, also an increase in real wages that, of course, increases the opportunity cost of not working, okay? Technological advances both within and outside the house, okay? I call it the vacuum cleaner effect, okay? So because of all these technological advances, the productivity at home has increased. So you need to spend less time in doing the clothes, the cooking, and so on, right? So you can devote more time to your professional career. Also, the reduction or elimination of discrimination. So in the last century, there was laws, for instance, in the US that forbidden women to work, right? So the eradication of these laws was an important thing. Then the expansion of public education, and this is very important, right? So women around the 70s, as I'm gonna explain later on, the participation rate of women at university substantially increased, okay? So this also explain part of the improvement in the labor market. Also, the introduction of contraceptive methods that allow women to control fertility. Okay, this was very important. And changes in expectations about the returns to investments in human capital. Okay, so I'm gonna talk in particular about this last bullet point, which is where I've done some research. Okay, so changes in expectations. In the 30s and the 40s, last century, I'm talking, when women were taking the decision of whether to go to university or not, they were also evaluating the returns to this investment, right? So going to college is costly, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of time. And you need to understand which are gonna be the returns to these investments, okay? So when these women, young women in the 30s were taking these decisions, they saw their moms, and most of them were not working and mostly taking care of their kids, okay? So then the returns to investments in education were very low by that time, okay? As due to many reasons, women, or the participation rate of women in the labor market increases, okay, the returns to education also increase, okay? So younger women or young women see an increase in these returns or in these investments in human capital, okay? So this also explains why, as time goes on, so here you see how the participation rate of women at the age of 50 for different cohorts, okay, those are born in the 19th century, okay, but how this increase in female labor force participation increases for different cohorts, right? So the daughters of these women see that their moms are now working, so they want to invest in human capital because they see a return to this investment, okay? And this explains why that's the enrollment rate of women, okay? In red, you see women, in blue, you see men, and you see that by the end of the 80s or the 90s, the participation rate of women at university overtakes that of men, okay? So now women are going to university, and part of it is because the changes in the expected returns to human capital investments, okay? So now they see an opportunity to work after they invest or after getting a degree, and not only to be the main providers of care within the household, limiting their opportunities, okay? So this change in expectation explains the increase in human capital investment, okay? So And this talks, or this is related to the intergenerational transmission of social norms, okay? So it's very important for your decisions today to see what previous generations are doing, right? So if you see that the generation of your mother is not working but taking care of the kids, then you don't see a point in investing in education because this is your mother, okay? So as women increase their participation in the labor force, daughters or kids are more motivated to also invest in human capital, okay? And so I always like to refer to this paper by Raquel Fernandez, why they have a paper, that's the title of the paper, but in the past, so when the working paper version of this paper was Marry Your Mom, okay? And the title of that was because what they see is that, so men whose mothers worked were more likely to marry someone, a woman that was working, okay? So there was this intergenerational transmission of attitudes towards the role of women in the labor market, right? So working was making a woman more attractive at some point, okay? And this was due to this intergenerational transmission of social norms. Okay, so I also have a paper showing that the attitudes toward gender roles, okay, so, and gender roles meaning what's the role of women in society, of women and men, but what's the role of women in the sense that, and when we talk about gender role attitudes in economics, so we refer to the fact that, or when we talk about traditional social norms, we refer to the fact that women are the main providers of care within the family, okay? So this idea of within household specialization, women taking care of the kids, men working at home, is what it's transmitted, or this family model is transmitted across generations, okay? So we show this empirically a long time ago. And more recently, I have a paper with a bunch of co-authors showing how the introduction of the paternity leave permit in Spain in 2007 changes the dynamics within households, okay, because it incentivizes men to participate more in childcare and domestic chores. This changes household dynamics. Kids realized of this change, and then they are more supportive of gender equality, okay? And we do that by conducting an experiment in many schools, okay? So we interview kids, around 2,000 kids in different schools. This was just before COVID. And now, so today my co-author is collecting more data, so we are expanding the sample size, okay? And we see how kids whose fathers were eligible for the paternity leave permit are more supportive of gender norms, okay? Or gender equality. How do we measure gender equality? So we ask kids a battery of questions, okay? So about what they think of the role of men and women in society, and we can detect that they are more supportive, but also in terms of expectations, okay? So we ask these kids, how do they see themselves in 20 years' time? So which is the probability that in 20 years' time, you will be working full-time when having kids, okay? And here we see a reduction in the gender gap in terms of participation, or in terms of full-time employment. So we see that boys affected by the reform are less likely to see themselves working full-time when having kids, while women or girls affected by the reform are more likely to see themselves working when having kids, right? So this project, or this study, allows us to conclude that public policy is a powerful instrument to change gender norms that at the same time we show that are very important for economic decisions, okay? So gender norms are driving the gender gaps, as I'm gonna explain in a few seconds, are driving a large part of the gender gaps that still persist today, okay? So exactly, that's the point. So okay, so what we see is that in the past century, female labor force participation increased quite a lot, okay? But since the last 20, 15 years, what we observe is an stagnation of gender convergence, right? So we are not making progress, okay? Why not? So basically, and I'm gonna go directly to this point. So basically, this stagnation is due to the fact that childcare responsibilities are not equally distributed within households, okay? And why do I say that? Well, this picture shows the earnings of men and women before having kids, okay? And then after the birth of the first kid, okay? So you see that the earnings of men remain quite stable after the birth of the first kid, while the earnings of women dramatically decreased, okay? And this is not just 1 or 2 years after the kid is born, but this drop in earnings, labor market earnings, persist over time, right? So this is 10 years after the kid is born, the gender gap in earnings between men and women is around 30%, okay? So that's the picture for Spain, that's the data for Spain, but this is a global phenomenon, okay? So again, the gender gap, so here you see the magnitude of the gender gap. So dark red means that the size, the magnitude of this gap between the earnings of men and women is even larger, okay? Or it's very, very large, okay? And here you see Spain and, okay, Latin American countries. So the US does a little bit better, the Scandinavian countries, because they have these progressive policies, but it's all over the place that you observe that after giving birth and for a few years, it seems that the gap does not disappear, even when the kids are a few years after birth, okay? So why are gender gaps so persistent? So one of the main reasons is the presence of these social norms that drive the unequal distribution of household chores and parenting, okay? So a large fraction of the gender gap in the labor market originates within households as a result of the unequal distribution of care and domestic responsibilities, okay? So most of the gender gaps we observe today in the labor market originate at home, right? Because women devote more time to childcare, and therefore this implies they have less time to develop their professional career. So what we propose, okay, to eliminate these gender gaps that originate at home, okay? So one proposal is to change the way we work, okay? So maybe we need to promote more flexible workplace, more flexible work practices, okay? So telework, schedule flexibility are tools that may improve gender convergence, and also family policies to facilitate the balance between the work and the personal life, okay? And here I have studied a lot, as you're gonna see, the paternity leave permit, and I'm also starting projects on universal, of making education 0 to 3 age universal, okay? And free, obviously. So about flexibility, I think that these pictures is very familiar to many of you, okay? So Claudia Goldin divides jobs into 2 types, okay? The ones that allow you to be an on-call parent, and those that allow you to be an on-call employee, okay? So wages here are higher than here, okay? And you have a lot of gender segregation across these 2 types of jobs, okay? So those jobs that allow you to be an on-call parent, these mean jobs that are flexible jobs, that allow teleworking and so on, are occupied by women. Well, this is, by the way, a picture of the Frankfurt airport that a friend of mine, a woman who was going to a seminar at the central bank, took in Frankfurt at 10 p.m., okay? And she sends me the picture saying, look, there are only men at the airport at that time, right? Okay, so where are the women? So probably, well, you know, okay? And probably these men are making a lot of money, okay? And they are taking very important decisions, okay? So we have this divide, or maybe one possibility is that including flexibility to the way we work make us more equal, though it's not clear, right? Because, for instance, so there is evidence that women accept lower wages in exchange of shorter commutes to work. Okay, that's gonna penalize wages. Okay, I also have a paper showing that maybe, well, not that maybe, that the increase in commuting time may explain part of this stagnation in gender convergence. Okay, and there is also some evidence pre-COVID that women value work flexibility more than men, okay? So that women are are ready to accept a lower wage for having the possibility to telecommute, for having more flexible schedule, okay? So after COVID, actually, I have run an experiment to test whether men and women have different preferences for this workplace flexibility. And by different preferences, here I mean again that women are ready to accept a wage cap to have a job with certain characteristics. And I do not identify these gender gaps, okay? So in red, you have the evaluation of women, in blue, that of men, and you see that they are very equal, but where is the one that it's not? Okay, they are very equal, but here, okay? So in sexual harassment, you see that the confidence intervals do not overlap, right? So women are really averse to take a job where there is sexual harassment, okay? And I think that this should be an issue we all need to be aware of, and I'm gonna talk about it later on, right? So in general, so this idea that introducing flexibility to the workplace may increase or decrease the gender gap, we don't know, and it may increase the gender gap if women value workplace flexibility more than men, does not seem to hold with post-COVID data, right? So both men and women value flexibility. So I think that this suggests that introducing flexibility to the workplace may have a positive impact on gender convergence, okay? So all these studies that I have on paternity leave, and I'm gonna show you two results. So you know that nowadays Spain has one of the most progressive paternity leave permits. Since 2021, the duration of the paternity leave permit has equalized the duration of that of the mother. Moreover, it's mandatory for a few weeks. It cannot be transferred. So it's very well designed to promote the involvement of men in childcare and to promote then equality within the household and in the labor market, okay? So we have exploited all these reforms, okay, using advanced statistical techniques. And what we can say is that first, as a result of the introduction of the paternity leave permit in 2007, we observe a delay in fertility, okay? So couples delay their decision to have the next kid, okay? And what we argue in this paper is that because now it's more costly for men to have kids because they have to ask their employers for a paternity leave, because they participate more at home. So there is a delay in the decision to have the next kid, and this affects the completed fertility of mature couples for a biological issue, right? So what we also observe is that the two most recent extensions of the paternity leave, that in 2020, that extended the paternity leave from 8 to 12 weeks, and that in 2021, that equalized the duration to that of the mother. So we see that this had a huge impact on the take-up of fathers, or men are actively participating or taking these permits. And then what we also observe is a delay on child development associated to this reform, okay? And this is not because fathers are not doing the right thing, but what we also observe is that kids are less likely to go to childcare, okay? And it may be that at childcare, there are professionals that are more able to detect these developmental problems, okay? So there are several hypotheses that we are working on with, okay? So, okay, I think I have 20 minutes still to go. So let me talk about gender gaps in research, that maybe it's closer or you feel more enthusiastic about that. So the motivation for this research, okay, comes from this picture that we all know, that indicates that that's for all public universities in Spain in 2023, okay? So this has been computed with data from public universities in 2023. So here, the thing is that while men and women study academic career at the similar percentages, right? So we are close to 50%. We observe that as the academic career advances, there is what you call a leaky pipeline, okay? So women drop out women are less present, okay? And the gaps are maximized when we reach like top positions, okay? So at the full professor level, on average, we only have a 30% of women, okay? So this is what happens at university. This is what happens at the CSIC, okay? I know that there are disciplines where this graph is much more extreme, okay? Where the presence of women is much lower if possible, but this can even reach the 14% in some areas, okay, within the CSIC. Despite women are a higher percentage at the predoctoral level, right? And actually, if you look at data all over the place, again, I only have this, okay. So if you look at, I don't have the picture here, but I can tell you that the percentage of female among PhDs in all disciplines has substantially increased during the last decades, okay? But in all disciplines, you observe this scissor graph, okay? That the representation of women at the beginning of the academic career is quite substantial, right? So the red line, for instance, is sociology. Economists are here, not so good, okay? The black line, okay? So we still, I mean, we are not enough at the assistant. Well, this thing of enough, because the other day I was giving a talk and someone asked me, okay, but do we need to be 50% all over the place? And my answer is no, we don't need to be 50% all over the place. We need to find the optimal, okay? But what doesn't seem to be optimal is this underrepresentation of women in top positions, for instance, right? So why only 10% of full professors in economics are women, right? And this is where I argue, and I'm gonna show that it's a waste of talent, okay? And also, if you think about STEM, right, that you may be familiar with that, we need to encourage women to study STEM. Why? Well, my answer is that first, wages are much higher in STEM. Second, you have more flexibility. So it has been shown that STEM jobs are more flexible than non-STEM jobs. And also because I think that the future labor market is gonna demand STEM jobs at a much higher rate than non-STEM jobs, right? So we need to be prepared to satisfy or to cover our demand, the demand of the future labor market, right? So I don't know whether we need to be 50% all over the place, but it's clear that we need to increase female representations in many margins of our society, okay? And that's, okay, so that's about the glass ceiling, the scissor graph, you can call it wherever you want. Also, and more, so if we think about our profession, okay, so why I think it's important to have, or why I think that gender gaps in research leadership are important, or which are the consequences of having research gaps in leadership positions within the academia, okay? So first of all, I think that it's important to close these gaps for the content of research, okay? So, I mean, you know that for many years, medical studies have been, or tests have been, or many drugs have been tested only on men, okay? That, for instance, I have a study showing that cancers that affect mostly women are underfunded, okay? So if we don't have, or if women are not present among leaders or leading research groups, there may be that areas or issues that affect half of the population are under-researched. Okay, so we need females in top positions leading research projects for the content of research to have a representative science, okay? Otherwise, we are gonna still also waste resources, right? So if we only invest in topics that are relevant to men, we are leaving half of the population underrepresented, also in terms of research or the content of research, okay? And I also think that it's important to close these gender gaps in terms of the functioning of the profession, okay? So as I'm gonna show you in a minute, the scientific profession suffers from the same problems that the labor market in general, plus some additional problems that I'm gonna list, okay? So I think it's important to have female leaders because otherwise we are again wasting talent, okay? And we can do better, we can be more efficient if we manage to have a better allocation of talent, okay? So, can you guess what do these word clouds represents? What they represent? You have this one on the left. These are keywords, okay? Some keywords, a bunch of keywords, and a bunch. The first question, do you see them different? Do you perceive differences between these two word clouds? Yes, some differences, right? So here you have gender, public health, aging, health, obesity. Here you have also obesity, sustainability, genetics, well, cancer is in both, bioinformatics, biomarkers. Any guess of what this can be?
What is the opinion of women and the other men?
So, these are the most popular keywords among projects led by female. In the last, in all the SGR, so Support Groups de Recerca, probably most of you are in one of these SGRs, okay? So here are the SGRs, the keywords in the SGRs led by females, and here the ones led by male, okay? So you see some differences, okay? Women include aging, public health, health is not here, right? It doesn't seem to be a topic men care about, okay? Well, they have cancer, but public health is not here. They don't have anything about caring, okay? So here you have aging. And they care about, and men care about other, I mean, the thing is that we have different preferences or different interests when we do research, okay? Good. So this is to show that the underrepresentation of women in top positions may lead some topics unexplored, right? Such as, for instance, public health, okay, or aging, okay, which is aging, by the way, we have an issue with that, okay? So we have a problem with that. And caring, again, I have also this picture for social science, and it's even more extreme, right? So on the projects led by women, you have all these caring things like kids, gender, women, violence, right? And then for men, you have housing, sustainability, climate change, and so on, right? So clearly we have different interests when doing this. Okay, so the representation of women or the absence of women may have implications for the content of science, okay? So now, some of the reasons why we observe these gender gaps within the academic profession, okay? So the first one is that women are less productive, right, in terms of publications, okay? So women accumulate less publications, and there is plenty of evidence about that. And there are reasons behind that, okay? So as in the rest of the labor market, women and men use their time differently, okay? So women invest a larger proportion of their time to childcare and household chores, right? And this leads women with less time to invest in their academic career, okay? So more time devoted to family and non-promotable tasks, okay? So non-promotable tasks, do I have it as another bullet point? No, okay, so there is also evidence that women are asked more often to organize dinners, to be in charge of non-research issues, of administrative staff within the academia, okay? So they are asked more often, but they also agree more often to take care or to assume these responsibilities, right? Also, we all know that publishing is a very competitive process, And there is also evidence that women are less competitive. So maybe that's another reason why women publish less. And there are also, it has been shown that there are biases in the publication process, okay? So an evidence of these biases is, for instance, in economic at least, women have less top 5 publications or high impact publications, okay? But more citations. So when one paper signed by a woman is published in one of these top journals, it lists more citations, okay? So this has been interpreted as evidence that women face a higher bar, okay? That the revision, there is evidence, for instance, that the evaluation process takes longer for women, okay? Or they are asked to do more things, right? So higher bar. And also it's important that to mention that, well, there is this citation premium, okay? That once you get published, once a woman publish a paper in one of these top 5 journals, gets more citations, this citation premium disappears when the citing paper is published in a top 5 journal, okay? So there is also this change, and I've looked at this work carefully, and what I see is that this citation premium comes from other women citing the work of women, but these citing women do not publish in top 5 or in high impact journals, okay? So there are also gender patterns in terms of citations. There is less recognition to women when they work in teams, okay? There is also evidence that female author papers are less likely to be accepted at conferences. There is also evidence that students are harsher to female professors, in particular if they are young and teach technical courses, okay? And there is also, as I'm gonna show you in a second, there are important gender gaps in access to research funding, okay? So all these margins, okay, all these different things sum up and explain the underrepresentation of women in top positions, okay? And I think that we need to take action, and there have been policies to correct these different margins, but I think that we really need to take part of that to eradicate all these biases and all these differences that have been documented, okay? So I have a proposal for that, okay? And it's about conductive affirmative action policy, okay? And this is based on evidence, and in particular, what we do in this paper is to evaluate a policy that was introduced in the last call of the SGRs, okay? So we evaluate an affirmative action policy to promote female talent among research groups in Catalonia. So we have data for the 3 calls of the SGR, okay? So 2014, 17, and 21, okay? So as you know, well, I'm gonna briefly explain what this is about, okay? So this is a call to receive funding to finance activities by research groups in Catalonia, and this is about 50,000 euros that you need to spend, well, on average, that's the amount you receive to be spent in 3 years, okay? So it's a small amount of money, but the thing is that the whole profession participates mostly, okay? So researchers in Catalonia are expected to be in one of these research groups, right? So we have almost the whole population, and we can observe behaviors of how we researchers behave in Catalonia regarding the composition of these SGRs, and how do we react, and how these groups reacted to the policy, okay? So in the last call, in the 21 call, there was additional points in the evaluation process to groups with a female principal investigator, okay, and with a share of female researchers, okay? And I'm gonna tell you a personal anecdote to why I decided to start this project, is that I received an email. I was in one of these SGRs, not leading, but I received an email from one of the SGRs in the group congratulating the male PI for the success in the evaluation and saying that the grade was excellent despite not being a woman, okay? And in case of had been a woman, the grade would have been 0.25% higher, okay? And also that he definitely wants to change gender in his passport because this is an economic incentive. Okay, so and I was like, I mean, this was shocking, right? And then I started to look at this project. We collected the data and analyzed the implications. Okay. So what we observe in this paper is that following the introduction of the affirmative action policy in 2021, the share of research groups led by women substantially increased. And the increase was primarily driven by high quality groups that changed the gender of the PI, okay, from a man to a woman. And the key result in this study is that these 0.25 points eliminated pre-existing biases or penalties against groups led by women that we could not explain by the quality of the PI or the group, okay? So there was a penalty, small penalty, but enough to penalize women, okay? And that these additional points eliminate, right? So the conclusion is that this AA policy had redistributive effects in the sense that female leadership increased in Catalonia, okay, as a result of the policy. We have more groups led by women without compromising efficiency, okay, because this is the big concern of quotas, okay? Oh, if we help women, okay, to promote, okay, this policy is, oh, why should you as a woman be granted 0.25 points, okay? So this is an affirmative action policy that helps women, okay? But in this case, and I think that in many other instances, or I know that in many other instances, the imposition or imposing quotas does not damage efficiency, okay? So the females that are selected because of the quota are not worse than the men that are not selected because, or that are left out, okay? And also, I see some senior people, some senior women here, okay, and probably you are called to sit on many committees, okay, because the committees have to, there you need parity, okay? So at the top, it's not necessary or measures are not implemented, but in all committees, you need at least a 40% of each gender, right? Which, by the way, it's useless, right? It doesn't help to promote women, and I have evidence on that, okay? So despite you spent a lot of time on that as a senior woman, it doesn't help to promote women, and there are other policies that are more efficient, okay, in the sense that are less costly to promote female talent, okay, such as this affirmative action policy, okay? So let me now go to the results, and I conclude. So we see this increase in female leadership, in particular in STEM, that were fields that are fields very male-dominated, okay? So you see that the effect of the policy is much higher, or it's larger than in non-STEM fields. The increase is about 15 percentage points, while in non-STEM is about 77 percentage points, also because the representation of female was pretty high before the policy, okay? Well, here it's, I mean, in non-STEM, you had already a 40% of women leaders, in STEM only 25, okay? And I know that this is due to the, also in part to the absence of women in these fields, okay? As a result of the policy, we also see an increase in the share of women, or in the share of projects led by women that were granted or that received funding. And this can be a mechanical effect of affirmative action, but it may also be that the composition of group changes or that the quality of the PI changes, okay, as a result of the policy. And that's basically what we investigate. So this table analyzes the dynamic of groups, okay, and here is the result that I want to stress. So here we have the groups that apply for funding both in 2017 and 2020, led by men in the 2 years. And here you have the groups that change the gender of the PI, okay? So you can see that in 2017, these two groups received a similar score on average. So in 2021, before adding up the affirmative action points, the groups led by female PIs received a lower score, okay? And then what we see is that the AA policy compensates, compensates this disadvantage, okay? So, why so? We first analyzed the characteristics of the PI. So, female PIs are less likely to be full professor, they are also younger and less likely to be ICREA, okay? And this does not change with the policy, okay? So you would say that female PIs are of worse quality than male PIs, at least in these dimensions. When we talk about the composition of groups, we see that groups led by women before the policy are smaller, sorry, it's here, are smaller. They accumulate less sexenies. They have less publications and less competitive projects, okay? This changes with the policy, okay? So once the policy is implemented, groups led by women are larger in size, accumulate more sexenies, and have more competitive projects, okay? So that's gonna affect the score when we compare the groups before and after, okay? And now let me show you the effects of the policy on the evaluation process, okay? So if you look at these two bars, this is the gender gap in scores before the policy was implemented, okay? And here you see that in 2021, the effect of being a female in 2021, the gap narrows a little bit, okay? Once you control by the quality of the group, okay, this advantage, okay, disappears, meaning that part of this advantage that we observed in 2021 is due to the quality or the composition of the groups, okay? But still, once we control by the quality and the composition of the groups, we still see a gap, okay? This is the gap in scores. Okay, and then when we control by the additional points of, or when we take into account the additional points of affirmative action, we see that in 2021, this gender gap is neutralized by the additional points. Okay, equating as a result, the probability of getting funds of those projects led by men and women. Okay, so here, what we see is that this affirmative action policy is neutralizing the effect of previous unexplained gaps, or gaps that we could not account by the quality, or we could not explain using the quality of the groups. Okay, so this is the conclusion of the project, of this project that I already. The message is that the policy equated the chances of men, of groups led by men and women of similar quality to obtain, they equated the chances to get funded and without compromising efficiency, okay? And well, basically that's all, that we've done important advances in terms of gender equality, but there's still a way to go, okay? And some recommendations to reduce gender gaps in research, but this is a bit something we can discuss now and maybe you have questions. Okay, so thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Lydia, for this very interesting presentation. And now is the time for questions in the audience. Who wants to comment or ask something?
Thank you, Lydia. I have a question, curiosity regarding the paternity leave. So you saw that it was an increase and the fathers were taking the paternity, but I don't know if you have actually evaluated if they have increased salaries while they are taking the paternity leave, or how is their development in that time?
So the paternity leave actually is a policy instrument with the objective. So the main objective is a gender policy for the labor market, right? So it's introduced or it's developed to reduce gender gaps in the labor market, okay? Through changing household dynamics or increasing the participation of men in the house, okay? What we observe is that the effect of these policies in the labor market is very small at the moment, or during the, in Spain, it has been implemented for 10 years, the more generous policies, but the impacts in the labor market are very small, right? So we haven't, and it's very hard to detect the type of story I think you have in mind, right? That it's now an employer, it's not gonna discriminate between a man and a woman because the employer knows that after the kid is born, the two of them are gonna be, or are expected to be 16 months on leave, right? So I know that some people are starting to look at the effects in the labor market of this, for instance, equalization, but so far on the research I've done, the effects on the labor market are very limited. So we do see changes within the house. So fathers get more involved, but it doesn't seem to have an effect in the labor market. The only thing we observe is that women return to work earlier as part-time workers. That's the only thing we have documented for Spain.
Thank you.
More questions.
So a comment on that. So if the children are ill, it's usually the women. So that's probably that go to take care of them. That's probably why there's no impact at all about this.
Okay.
No, I mean after
you're right.
this, I don't know how many.
So I don't have.
After 16 weeks, business as usual. No, it's so probably.
Well, business as usual. I mean, we do observe some changes, right? And in particular, so the amount of time that men spent at home, not only during the leave, but some years after, and we have quantified that. So fathers spend more time with the kid, or at least doing housework, right? That includes childcare. Even 12 years later, that it's when we have measured the impact, right? But it's true that still women spend more time on home production, which implies taking care of sick kids and things like that. But hopefully this is gonna change, right? Or these policies are meant to change. And that's the whole point of equalizing household dynamics at home, or reducing specialization, right? And why should be women in charge of the kid? Or why should be a woman who goes to school to pick up the kid when he or she is sick, right? So I think that's the whole point, right? That it should be equally distributed, or it should be men's responsibility, no? Or at least as equal. But I mean, that's a clear measure of gender disparities. Who goes to pick up the kid when you receive a call from the school?
Regarding the paternity leaves, if I'm allowed, I will introduce some polemics. I've heard a comment or of some male scientists say, I am looking after having my paternity leave because then I will be able to write papers.
There is evidence on that. You want me to show you an academic?
Yes.
So there is a paper published at the American Economic Review showing that men use the paternity leave to write papers. And to watch football. There is another one showing that during the World Cup, there was an increase in the number of men that applied for paternity leave.
So the question is that, okay, then the statistics say that others have taken their paternity leaves and so, but in fact they have been making their career to progress, maybe, and instead of taking care of the children.
So in academia, there is a paper that supports your point, okay? So there is an economic paper showing that after the paternity leave, the probability to get tenure for men is higher than for women, and the reason is that men are more likely to publish in a top 5 after being in paternity leave. So that's an issue, okay? Then outside academia, we do observe that on average, men get more involved, okay? But it's true that we also do not get more involved within the house, okay? But it's true that we also don't find strong effects in the labor market, okay? So despite, I was very fan of this policy, okay? after all these years studying the policy, I do think that it should be there, right? And actually I mean, it's important because household dynamics have changed. And I've shown that the view of kids has changed because they see a more egalitarian model within the house. And this is going to have long-term effects. The kids are going to be more egalitarian if they see their fathers more involved on the business, okay? But yeah, I think that there should be other options, right? And to me, the universalization of 0-3 years old education, it's a key instrument, and it's not implemented in Spain, neither in Catalonia, though they say it's free. So education is free in Catalonia, 0-3, but it's not universal, right? So not all kids have a slot guarantee in the system. And well, they claim it's free, right? So that's, and so I mean, in principle, it's free.
Free for people that cannot afford more of it, depending on your wage.
But since 2022, since 2022, if you get a slot, it's free. For kids older than 2 years. So in 2022, it was for kids 2 years old. And I think that last year it was extended to 1 year old. Okay. And for those who got, not yet, next year. Okay. But you first need to get a slot. That's where I'm saying it's not universal, right?
I have a question on quotas, because as you said, the parenting committee does not help women, and I believe that. But so it's a bit voluntary, because participation is quotas, or is good help opinion. So why is,
What do you mean in participation in?
I mean, in committees, if there is a sort of a quota of that, I don't know, there has to be balance of gender. Usually, this means using women in the committee, but this does not help women.
Exactly. So this is a study.
In a participation in a research team, that helps.
Well, because it's different, right? So I can give you well, no, this is scientific evidence, and then I can give you my opinion. Okay, so this is a study by Manuel Bagüez and co-authors who have collected data on promotions within university. Okay. Ooh, and this has, so they collected data on promotions, and they show how the random composition of committees in terms of gender, okay, the variation, meaning the random variation of going from 35 to 45, okay, so this type of variations, they exploit this variation and show that increasing the percentage of women do not help women to get promoted, okay? So there's a huge cost for the women that need to sit in all these committees, and there's no benefit for women in terms of promotion. Okay, so that's the role of quotas in evaluation committees. Okay, that they do not really play a difference. When we go to research teams, so here we can talk about having women leading a team, that I think that there are many reasons why this can increase the participation of women, or at least the situation of women in the team. And also why, I mean, in this explicit policy, okay, in this explicit policy, there was a rule, right? So there was an incentive to increase the share of women in the research team, okay? And this may have also, again, many implications for the way that the team works, for instance, at the time that meetings are scheduled for the content of research. I think that the gender composition of research teams, not only the leader, but also the bulk, I mean, to have a diverse team, I think that enriches science, right? And for that, I don't have like strong evidence. So I don't have the result. Well, I do have the results here, I think. But what we do is to construct an indicator using the content of the different research groups that apply to this call. We use machine learning to construct an indicator of whether the project was taking into, or whether the group was taking into account gender perspective. Okay, and what we see is that groups led by females are more likely to take the gender perspective into account than groups led by men, okay? But also we have this result that after the policy, it seems that men also increase the gender perspective. Okay, so in the SGRs, you are not forced to include the gender perspective, but for instance, in the last two calls of the Proyectos del Ministerio, you have a box there where you need to justify whether your project or how your project takes the gender perspective into account, right? And I think that these initiatives may help in changing the content of science or taking a broader perspective of what science should be about. Well, first of all, but I mean, about the affirmative action policies, because they have a lot. I've been doing a bit of research and there's not much of these actions in research. So maybe they have it at the university level, or it's a law or a policy of the university, but not at the federal level for...
No, I have no idea.
Which type of policies?
Well, it's also for minority groups as well.
For minority groups, yes. For minority groups, I think that there is more on that. Okay. But for gender policies, I'm not aware of that. And in Spain, actually, when we went to Sevilla, and this representative of the gender committee was showing the scissor graph and all the data, and I was not convinced by, well, this person was not providing either initiatives or reasons to understand the scissor graph. Then I said, listen, in other institutions, they have quotas, right? So for instance, at the UB, so if they have 10 positions for full professors, half of them are for women and half of them are for men. So they have quotas in the allocation of full professorships. And then, so I suggested to use quotas at the CSIC level to reduce. Everyone is so concerned about the scissor graph, but I mean, I don't see many initiatives, right? And then, so the CSIC cannot use quotas because the positions are not their own positions, but are from the Ministry of Hacienda, Administraciones Públicas or whatsoever. And this is using quotas is unconstitutional in this country. So that's maybe the reason why you don't see these actions more often. But I mean, obviously, so it took us a lot of time to get this, because here we have the population of all the SGRs, we have all the members, we have everyone, okay? So it took us a while, and at the beginning, the government, or the AGAUR, which is the institution in charge of this policy, was very concerned, like they were very scared of us finding, because that's the problem in this society, right? Everyone is scared of someone else analyzing their data, right? So they were super scared. And then when we showed them the results, like, listen, this 0.25 was the perfect number, right? Because it actually compensated the bias that was unexplained. And then we asked them, how did you choose this number? And then the Director General said, well, this was a long negotiation because STEM fields didn't want this 0.25, right? They want even a lower number. The proposal of the administration of the government was 0.5, right? And they had to reduce it to 0.25 because in STEM fields they didn't have enough women to satisfy the 0.20 or the 40% of women in the research team. So,
what are these asterisks meaning?
The significance level. So this is an OLS regression. This is a linear regression. These are the estimated coefficients, the standard errors, and the asterisk means that they are significant at the 1, 5, or 10% level.
I have a doubt regarding the SGR, because in many cases you can have recognition, but zero money.
Here I only have those that I restricted to those that apply for funding,
All
not
right, okay,
recognition.
because you can apply for funding and then you can.
Here I only
okay,
have people.
congratulations, €0. So sometimes I don't know whether this 0.25 is included in this.
But you specify whether you apply for recognition or for funding.
Yeah.
So here I only have those that explicitly mention that they apply for funding.
All right. Thank you.
I was wondering if you have any of those studies, but not with SGR, but with ICRIA, because this is the kind of the top and more prestigious positions at the Catalan university level. So I was wondering if you have any studies on that.
No. But I think, yeah, now that we are so good friends with them, I think we could apply and get, but here because you can check who has an ICRIA and the gender gap is huge,
And
right? But you don't know, you need information on the applicants, right?
Okay.
Because if women do not apply, then you need the applicants, the quality of the applicants, and
The juries as well.
the composition of the committee. But again, so the composition of the committee in all these studies. So here when I have the evaluations, you see I have the gender composition of the committee. Okay, so I know which is the share of women in the committee that evaluates your proposal, and it doesn't change. So here you can see that once I control here, so this is the result. This is the penalty without controlling for anything. And here it's the penalty when I control by the composition of the committee and nothing changed. So the penalty doesn't change.
In this, I wanted to comment that as I heard or I read that women can have also gender biases, conscious or unconscious. So by including 40% of women in a committee, you do not guarantee that the committee will not have gender bias, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, you see it in the fields of research, right? We care about different, men and women care about different things, right? So maybe you are more positive towards a project that it's related to a field that you feel closer. Okay, actually, this is another project I have, like I'm working with the data because all that requires a lot of data, right? And so I want to see whether the content of the project and the gender composition of the committee influences whether the project is elected, right? Because if researchers have different projects, we researchers also act as evaluators, right? And when we act as evaluators, we also use this or show or our decisions are influenced by these perceptions or preferences. And yeah, of course, this may happen.
I heard that the proposal would be to include in the committees a person gender sensitive, even if this person had no vote, that could at least detect gender biases and say, well, you cannot choose
a gender police. A gender police. No, because so I'm very grateful to the few men that are sitting here today, but I think that most of us female already knew these pictures, right? But I think that, so one of my recommendations is to raise awareness, right? So the first one is, if we cannot do affirmative action, at least let's raise awareness, right? So let's make public all these differences that we have documented between men and women and the causes, right? Because some of these causes are actually unfair, right? So why, so I used to teach econometrics when I was young, right? So you can imagine my evaluations, right? And those who know me can guess that I'm tough, right? So my evaluations were not very good, right? And partly it's because I was tough, right? And I was kicking them out of the class when they were using the cell phone and all that, but also because I was a young woman teaching a technical degree, right? So this was a penalty in my evaluations. And I was, from this study, I see that I'm not, well, I'm going to show you the graph, but so I'm not the only one, right? That in general, in particular, male students are harsher to female young professors teaching technical courses, okay? So why this, right? So when the quality of, I mean, this is conditioning on the quality of the professor, everything, right? So it's the same professor being evaluated by a male and a female student, okay, getting a different result, okay? So inciting, right? So why do we observe that men undercite women, okay? And women oversight, or well, this is oversight women, but when you have top women, they don't cite other women anymore, right? So that's a change in, I mean, why that, right? Or why teamwork is, and why when women co-author, their contributions are less recognized, right? So here you can see, this is the probability of getting tenure in a US university, right? So you see that men are not affected by the number of papers that they co-author, while women are highly penalized by co-authoring or by participating in co-work, right? Or in joint, in teams.
Yeah, let me add that similar studies and graphs have been made on physics, and that this gender bias in evaluation and in peer reviewing and inciting exists also.
So I think that we need to be aware. And the other day I went to this institute that in Barcelona.
Jaume Almera.
Okay, so I gave not the same talk, but more focus on gender research. And then the director, who was a very nice person, said, okay, so we are all here, but we are young. And to be evaluated for full professors, you need a full professor in the committee, right? And I'm not that sure that full professors are aware of this situation, right? So I think that it's our responsibility to spread the word and take action.
No more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lídia.